According to Brett Siegel, the Golden State Warriors potentially have Nikeil Alexander-Walker and Herb Jones on their target list this offseason. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Plus, LeBron James is now expected to pick up his player option. No real surprise there. And we're going to look at some of the top free agents on the market and where they can end up. We're going to talk about all that and more on today's NBA Central.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBA Central.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of NBA Central, your number one spot for everything basketball related. I'm the host, Hayes, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go and get into this content today, y'all. So, according to Brett Siegel, the Golden State Warriors have Nikeil Alexander-Walker and Herb Jones as potential targets leading into this offseason. And I feel like this, right? The Warriors are looking for upgrades. They also have the Jonathan Kuminga thing to kind of worry about. You kind of see how that's all going to end. They officially extended a qualifying offer to Jonathan Kuminga, locking him in as a restricted free agent, which means that the Golden State Warriors are either going to match an offer for him or re-sign him and then try to move him later on down the road, or that they are going to, another team's going to sign him to an offer sheet. And we'll see how that ends up shaking out. Sign-in trades are still available as well. We'll see how all that shakes out for these teams. But Nikeil Alexander-Walker and Herb Jones would both be adding two basically veteran players to the team that add some much-needed defense to that team as they're gearing up, still trying to go on find ways to find a playoff, a championship path with having Jimmy Butler and Dre and Stephen Curry all under contract. Now, Herb Jones will be a little bit more difficult of a get, I would think, if that's who they're pursuing, unless the Pelicans have an interest in Jonathan Kuminga and trying to work out something there. But overall, I do, Nikeil Alexander-Walker is a free agent. And, we'll see what happens with the Minnesota Timberwolves. When we talk about the list of kind of the bigger free agents out there, now that they've re-signed Naz Reid, they still have Julius Randle, who's a free agent they got to make a decision for. Nikeil Alexander-Walker's the next one that the Minnesota Timberwolves clearly got to find a direction and something for. So we'll see there. But I like both these options for the Golden State Warriors. I think you're adding young wings that still, have upside, right? Herb Jones is a really good on-ball defender. Nikeil Alexander-Walker is a solid on-ball defender, too. You can't take that away from him. I think both those players can kind of fit in what they're trying to do overall, and I think that makes some sense. It remains to be seen how much Nikeil is going to garner out on the free agent market. Now, Herb Jones, we do have a little bit more kind of knowledge on what that could look like because he is under contract at $13.9 million next season. But the Golden State Warriors do have their mid-level exception at their disposal. Like I said, they also have the Jonathan Kuminga, who could potentially, be gotten in the sign and trade, something like that. So there's a lot of options out there if those are the players that kind of the Golden State Warriors are focusing on. And I think both these guys make some sense. And Nikeil Alexander-Walker's, I think, should be, especially for teams that are contending or near contending teams that need some defensive production and some three-point shot-making ability, Nikeil Alexander-Walker could bring a lot of that for teams. And so a team like the Golden State Warriors, any other kind of near contending team, should all be taking looks at Nikeil. And, maybe we'll see what the Minnesota Timberwolves do in that if they want to retain him or not. But I love the idea of Nikeil Alexander-Walker going to the Golden State Warriors. It's just, can they get it done? Is that going to be the most enticing thing for a player like Nikeil, who was just on the Minnesota Timberwolves, who, made it to a Western Conference final? So that's going to be the thing out there. Like I said, love the players, both that they're naming. And the Golden State Warriors are in this really interesting place, right? Because they aren't necessarily worried as much about the future. It does not seem, right? They're worried about the now. And they're trying to, in this 2-year window that they have remaining open, that they have targeted for, this run that they have with Steph, Jimmy, and Dre, trying to load up with players that make sense, that aren't like super expensive, aren't these long-term, contracts. And even if you do have to give Nikeil Alexander-Walker a 3 or 4 year contract, that's a contract that you feel pretty confident in even after this run goes down, because he's just a consummate role player that understands and knows exactly what he is on the basketball court. So, we'll see how all that shakes out. I like it when it comes down to it, and we'll see what the Warriors can do. They are going to be active. I think more active than people are trying to find the right pieces to tinker and make this team kind of work a little bit better. Yeah, it's been fairly quiet on the front of their center pursuit. That was one of the things that most people expected them to kind of target as the center. But we shall see what happens. There are some targets out there as well, like Day'Ron Sharpe, that could help them a little bit without necessarily breaking the bank, but of course, bigger trade targets that they could go after too. So let me know what you guys think on that down below in regards to Herb Jones and Nikeil Alexander-Walker being kind of the players that the Golden State Warriors could focus on, at least according to Brett Siegel. Now, with that, we're going to move on. LeBron James is expected to pick up his $52 million player option to stay with the Los Angeles Lakers, and I don't really think there's any surprise. I know there have been some talk on, LeBron may opt out to sign a new deal and stay longer and things like that, which is something that he's done before. But, it is what it is. Now with him picking up his option, the thing is, what does that leave the Lakers? I think that's the most important thing here. They have enough to sign a player with their $5.7 million taxpayer mid-level exception is what they can do there. Now, that is also dependent on what happens with Dorian Finney-Smith, who has a $15.4 million player option of his own for next season that I think he's probably likely to pick up. I don't know if he gets that money out there in the free agent market, but maybe he opts out if he feels like he can get a longer deal. So we'll see what happens there. But the Lakers aren't necessarily equipped with a lot of assets. And this is a team that people have expected, like, what is going to happen? We already know that Austin Reeves turned down a deal with him and the Lakers kind of eyeing signing a more longer-term contract to get him locked in there. And the Lakers still are in the pursuit of a center potentially as well. So, that's kind of the next phase. And if I'm the Los Angeles Lakers, I'm just happy to have this question out of the way, and that once free agency opens, the Lakers have their focus on getting the players in here that they need. And they're still trying to reshape that roster more to suit Luka Doncic, who they got last year at the trade deadline, which is still one of the most surprising deals that I've ever seen happen in NBA history. So they're looking to kind of go down that path now. And so LeBron picks up this player option. We'll see what the future holds for him after that. Is Bron seriously considering a retirement after this? We shall see. Bryce James is going to be coming into the league soon, so we could very well see LeBron, who is still very productive as a player, even at his age, see him try to stick it out a couple more years to play with both his sons. But Bryce he's not going to have the Bronny thing. Like, Bryce is probably going to be a lottery pick. So, we'll see what happens with that one once Bronny gets into the league. We're a little ways away from that still happening, but keep a lookout for that one as well. But overall, this isn't too much of a surprise. I don't think anybody should be too overly surprised with that. But that now leads us to talk about the free agent class of 2025, with free agency opening up officially on Monday at 6 p.m. LeBron James potentially coming off the board. That leaves James Harden as probably the number one player out in the free agent market, but he does have a player option for $36.3 million. I expect him to pick that option up, so he's probably not going to be there, which then makes it a more interesting free agent class. You got Miles Turner, who has to be one of the most attractive free agents out there. The Pacers do hold his whole bird rights. Reportedly that, before the Halliburton injury, they were open to going into the luxury tax for the first time in a while for them to keep Miles Turner. They don't typically play the luxury tax. I still think that's probably going to be a thing there, but you never know. Injuries change things, and paying the luxury tax for a team that doesn't have the ceiling, of course, that it had when Halliburton was healthy, that's going to definitely impact and affect some things. Next up, I would think Julius Randle is still pretty high up on there. Now, he still does have a player option as well that he has to decide on sooner rather than later. The player option is for $30.9 million. And if he does decide to decline that player option, I think that the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to be very they'll probably need to keep him unless they got something else up their sleeve. Part of the reason they traded for Julius Randle in that trade is that it provided more financial flexibility than Karl-Anthony Towns' deal. So, we'll see what happens there. But then you got restricted free agents basically after that. Josh Giddey, who I think the Bulls are focused on keeping. There's not really a big market, and that's kind of what's affecting a lot of these free agents is there's not a lot of money out there in free agency this year. Not that like there's going to be in 2026, right? So because of that, a player like Josh Giddey, who is a restricted free agent, he's probably going to end up staying with his team. Another player like Quentin Grimes, who's another restricted free agent, probably going to stay with the Philadelphia 76ers, even though with them having VJ Edgecombe, maybe that changes some things there, but Grimes has been a player that his career has kind of gone up and down. He had a really good stretch in March with that Philadelphia 76ers team, averaging 26 points, 5 rebounds, and shooting 40% from three. So, they may be there to keep him. I do think the 76ers, they need to retain talent, especially if they're going to want to keep, this team, and keep their hopes that they're going to be able to be better the next year. I think you're going to want to keep Quentin Grimes on that team. And then Jonathan Kuminga is such an interesting free agent. Restricted free agent with the Warriors, tendering him a qualifying offer. But he clearly wants to be in a place where he can be prioritized more. And the view, how Kuminga is viewed, it really depends by who's the person talking about it. Because you have these people that have the side of he just needs to go to a team where he can be more him and he has star level upside. I do think that the kid has really good talent. I think he can be a really good NBA player. I don't know what level I'm willing to put that at, but clearly did not work it with Golden State. And that's where the other segment of fans comes in at, is the fact if you can't fit in on that team with that coach and those players, who's to say they should do it for any winning team? And I get why that question's there. I think situations are kind of determined. I do think Steve Kerr wanted him to play a role more than his game, so at times too, but he's 22 years old, and I think that a team could do really good to try to find a way to get him in a sign and trade with the Golden State Warriors. Now, keep in mind, with restricted free agents, only half their base salary counts towards sign and training, and it makes it a little bit more difficult there, but we'll see what happens. Next up, Nikeil Alexander-Walker. I have him as one of the top 10 free agents on the board. I think that what he does as far as age, the fact that it'll be a huge upgrade for him, just even him make $9-10 million. He's a prototypical 3-and-D wing. He's 27, so not that he's super young to where you're still like, hey, there could be really high untapped potential there, but it's that he's young enough and a veteran enough to where he can fit in and you know exactly what he's going to be. With the Timberwolves having Terrence Shannon Jr. there, who's 24, despite only going into his second year, he could be ready to step into that role at a cheaper price, albeit not necessarily the defender that Nikeil Alexander-Walker is, but I think he makes a lot of sense as well. And then at that point, it's really a crapshoot. Santi Aldama, Malik Beasley, Brook Lopez, you got these players as well, that Dorian Finney-Smith, that are all really good free agent prospects. Dennis Schroeder, right? That can shape out a really solid free agency, but you're not looking at those guys as players that necessarily shoot you over the top. They're more so just solid players that can get you where you need to go, that can help kind of solidify what you're doing, but they're not necessarily big top. The other one is Cam Thomas, but I do think he's probably going to stay in Brooklyn. But let me know what you guys think as far as some of the bigger name free agents out there, what their outcomes could be. Let me know that down below. Make sure you guys are following us at NBA Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, NBA Central Show at gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the #1 spot for everything basketball related. And we'll see you guys the next time I feel like making a video, probably tomorrow. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.